The unexpected choice. James never thought he would end up in an alien palace. Yet here he was, standing in a room with walls that seemed to glow with a soft purple light. Just hours ago, he had been fighting for his life. The battle had started like any other day in space. James was leading his small crew on a routine patrol near Earth's outer defense line. The morning stars shone peacefully until the alien ships appeared. They came out of nowhere, their massive black ships blocking out the distant sun. Everyone, battle stations. James had shouted, his heart racing as he saw the size of the alien fleet. His small crew of 5 moved quickly, but he knew they didn't stand a chance. Still, they had to try. They had to protect Earth. The first blast hit their ship hard. Red warning lights flashed everywhere as their shields started failing. James ran between stations, helping his crew members keep the ship together. When Sarah got hurt trying to fix the engines, he took her place. When Mike couldn't handle the weapons alone, James helped him target the enemy ships. "Captain, we can't take much more," Tom shouted from his control station. The ship shook again, and sparks flew from the ceiling. James knew he had to make a choice. He could see other human ships falling around them, being captured one by one. The aliens weren't destroying them. They were taking prisoners. Maybe there was a chance to save his crew. "Everyone, listen to me," James said, his voice steady despite his fear. "We're going to surrender. It's our only chance to survive." The alien soldiers that boarded their ship were tall and looked almost human, except for their purple skin and silver eyes. They moved with grace, their armor shifting colors like oil on water. James stood in front of his crew, ready to protect them. But something strange happened. Instead of throwing them in prison, the aliens separated them. They took James to a special room and gave him new clothes. Soft, strange fabric that felt like water against his skin. They cleaned him up and treated his wounds with devices that hummed and glowed. Now, hours later, he stood in this purple room waiting. The door opened and James held his breath. The alien who entered was clearly important. Her dress flowed like liquid starlight, and a crown of crystal flowers sat on her head. The alien queen. "Human," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "You showed great courage today. Your actions to protect your crew were noticed." James stayed quiet, watching her carefully. He had so many questions, but he knew better than to speak without permission. "I have a proposal for you," the queen continued. "I need someone brave, someone who knows how to protect others, someone like you." "What do you want from me?" James finally asked. The queen's silver eyes seemed to look right through him. "I have a daughter. She is young and needs guidance. Someone to teach her about courage, about leadership, someone to protect her." James couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You want me to teach your daughter and protect her," the queen added. "There are those who would harm her. I've watched how humans care for their young, how fiercely they protect them. That is what I want for my daughter." Before James could respond, a small sound came from the doorway. A young alien girl stood there, probably about 12 in human years. She had the same purple skin as her mother, but her eyes were different. They swirled with colors like a nebula. The princess moved closer, seemingly curious about James. As she got near, he noticed something odd. Around her, the air seemed to shimmer, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. The princess reached out her hand, and for a moment, James saw strange patterns of light dance around her fingers. The queen smiled. "My daughter is special, even among our kind. She needs someone who can help her understand her gifts, someone who isn't afraid of things that are different." James looked between the queen and the princess, understanding slowly dawning. This wasn't just about teaching or protecting. This was about helping someone who was unique, possibly powerful, learn to handle their abilities. He had a feeling his life was about to change in ways he never could have imagined. And somehow, looking at the young princess's curious, hopeful face, he knew he couldn't say no. Palace mysteries. James's first week in the alien palace was full of surprises. His room wasn't just purple anymore. It changed colors based on his mood. When he woke up feeling confused, the walls turned a soft blue. When he felt homesick, they shifted to a gentle green that somehow made him feel better. The princess, whose name was Lyra, wasn't like any student he had ever imagined teaching. One morning, as he walked into the garden for their first lesson, he found her floating 3 feet above the ground, surrounded by dancing lights. Oh! Lyra quickly dropped to the ground when she saw him, her purple cheeks turning a darker shade. "I'm sorry. Mother says I shouldn't show my abilities to others." "Why not?" James asked, sitting on a nearby bench that seemed to grow right out of the crystal ground. Lyra sat beside him, her nebula eyes swirling with worry. "Some of our people think I'm too different. They say my powers are unnatural." She held out her hand, and a small ball of energy formed above it, pulsing with rainbow colors. "No one else can do this." Just then, the energy ball expanded suddenly, shooting sparks everywhere. James instinctively moved to protect Lyra, but the sparks passed right through him, leaving behind a feeling of warmth and something else. Memories of Earth, of sunny days and ocean waves. "That's amazing," James said honestly. "You're not just creating energy, you're sharing feelings and memories." A small smile appeared on Lyra's face. "You're the first person who hasn't been scared." Their lesson was interrupted by a servant rushing into the garden. "Princess, you must come quickly. Something's happening in the throne room." They hurried through the crystal corridors, passing other aliens who whispered and pointed at James. He noticed some war badges shaped like broken stars, and they seemed to glare at Lyra with barely hidden hatred. In the throne room, they found chaos. The Queen's Advisory Council was arguing loudly, their voices echoing off the high ceiling. The Queen sat on her throne, looking worried. "The old prophecy is clear," one advisor shouted, pointing at ancient symbols floating in the air. "When star-touched powers join with earthborn wisdom, the kingdom will change forever." "Which is exactly why the princess must be controlled," another yelled back. "These powers, this human teacher, it's too dangerous." Lyra grabbed James's hand, trembling slightly. He noticed the air around them beginning to shimmer again, but this time it felt different, powerful, almost dangerous. "Calm thoughts," he whispered to her. "Remember what we practiced." The shimmering slowly faded, but James saw several council members watching them with suspicious eyes. One counselor wearing a broken star badge quickly left the room, speaking quietly into a strange device. That night, as James walked back to his room, he heard whispers from behind a corner. "The human is teaching her to control it. Prophecy can't be fulfilled if... Take care of both of them before." He turned the corner quickly, but the speakers were gone. Only a small crystal lay on the ground, glowing with a recording of star maps and what looked like battle plans. Back in his room, James found a note written in shimmering ink. "Not all of us fear change. Watch for the silver flowers when the 3 moons align. Trust only those who remember the old songs." He looked out his window at the 3 moons rising in the purple sky, wondering what he had gotten himself into. In the garden below, he saw Lyra practicing alone, creating beautiful patterns of light that seemed to tell stories of ancient times. One thing was becoming clear: he wasn't just here to teach anymore. He was part of something much bigger, something that could change both their worlds forever. In the distance, a silver flower bloomed in the night, glowing with the same rainbow energy that surrounded Lyra. The prophecy's words echoed in his mind: star-touched powers and earthborn wisdom. As he watched Lyra training, he realized she wasn't just different, she might be the key to everything. And someone in the palace wanted to make sure that key was never used. Hidden threats. The attack came during the light dance ceremony. All 3 moons were full, casting their purple glow over the palace's crystal gardens, where Lyra was supposed to perform the traditional royal dance. But something was wrong. "The lights," James whispered, noticing it first. The floating orbs that usually illuminated the garden paths were dimming one by one, creating patches of darkness. In his month at the palace, he'd learned that alien technology never just failed. Lyra stood in the center of the garden, her ceremonial dress flowing like liquid starlight. As she began to dance, raising her hands to start the traditional light patterns, James saw shadows moving where they shouldn't be. "Wait," he called out, but it was too late. Dark figures emerged from behind the crystal trees, wearing masks made of what looked like frozen shadow. They carried weapons that seemed to absorb light itself. But they hadn't counted on Lyra's unique powers. As the first attacker leaped forward, Lyra's fear triggered something new. The energy that usually created beautiful light patterns exploded outward in a wave of pure memory. Everyone in the garden was suddenly overwhelmed by visions. Asterisk, at ancient battlefield where crystal ships fought against darkness, asterisk, asterisk, a first queen making a pact with beings made of pure light, asterisk, asterisk, a prophecy written in stars, showing Earth and this alien world linked by destiny, asterisk. James fought through the visions, pushing his way toward Lyra. The attackers were stunned, caught in the wave of memories, but one had managed to resist. He wore a broken star badge. The prophecy must not be fulfilled, the attacker shouted, raising his shadow weapon. James reached Lyra just as her power took another unexpected turn. The memories around them became solid, ghost-like warriors from the visions appeared, fighting alongside them. The garden became a chaos of past and present, light and shadow. "Focus on the light," James called to Lyra, remembering their lessons, "like we practiced." Lyra nodded, her nebula eyes now blazing like supernovas. She raised her hands again, but this time she didn't create lights. She began weaving the memories themselves into a shield of pure energy. The queen arrived with her guards, but stopped in amazement at what she saw. Her daughter, the princess everyone had called too different, was standing in a sphere of living memory, protected by phantom warriors from the planet's past, while a human teacher stood beside her, helping her control powers no one had seen in 1,000 years. "The memory weaving," the queen whispered. "The ancient art we thought was lost." The lead attacker laughed despite being surrounded. "You don't understand what you're protecting," he said to James. "The girl isn't just different, she's the end of everything we've built. The prophecy speaks of change, but it doesn't say if that change brings evolution or destruction." Lyra's shield flickered as doubt crept into her mind. The phantom warriors began to fade. "Change isn't always destruction," James said firmly, putting his hand on Lyra's shoulder. "Sometimes it's growth. Look." He pointed to where her energy shield touched the crystal trees. Instead of damaging them, it was making them grow, bloom with silver flowers that glowed with rainbow light, the same light he'd seen in her powers. The silver flowers, one of the queen's advisors gasped, the sign of the great transformation. But the attackers weren't finished. The one with the broken star badge pressed a crystal device, and suddenly the garden's crystal trees began to crack. Dark energy seeped from the cracks, forming into shadowy creatures. "These are the guardians of the old ways," the attacker announced. "They slept since the first queen's time, waiting for this moment. They know what must be done." Lyra looked at James, fear and determination mixing in her swirling eyes. "I need to try something," she said. "Something I've been practicing in secret. Will you help me?" James nodded, remembering all their lessons about trust and courage. "Whatever you need." Lyra took his hand, and suddenly James felt her power flowing through him too. Together, they began to glow with the same rainbow energy that filled her memories. The shadow creatures hesitated. "Earthborn wisdom," Lyra said softly. "Star-touched power," James finished. And as their combined power lit up the night sky, the prophecy's true meaning began to unfold in ways no one had expected. Royal secrets. The palace was in chaos after the attack. Crystals glowed with warning lights everywhere, and the shadow creature's dark energy had left permanent marks on the garden walls. But the biggest change was in how everyone looked at Lyra now. The princess sat in the ancient library, surrounded by floating screens showing texts in the alien language. James watched as she absent-mindedly created small memory-like creatures that danced around her, a new trick she'd discovered. Each tiny light being showed snippets of different memories from their world's history. "Look at this," Lyra called him over, pointing to a screen showing ancient symbols. "It's about the first queen, my ancestor. She wasn't just our ruler, she was different like me." James leaned closer, amazed as the symbols rearranged themselves under Lyra's touch. A hologram appeared above the text, showing a woman who looked remarkably like Lyra, surrounded by the same rainbow energy they had used in the garden. "The texts say she made a pact," Lyra continued, her nebula eyes reflecting the hologram's light, "not just with the light beings, but with humans too." Before James could respond, one of Lyra's memory-like creatures suddenly grew larger, projecting a scene around them. They found themselves standing in what seemed to be the same library, but thousands of years ago. In the memory, the first queen stood with two humans wearing strange armor made of crystal and light. "The bond must be maintained," the ancient queen was saying. "When the time comes, Earth and stars must unite again." The memory shifted, showing a great battle. Shadow creatures fought against armies of both humans and aliens, while above them, beings of pure light rained down power from the skies. "Those humans," James said, pointing to their crystal armor, "they could use powers like yours." The memory faded as the queen entered the library. She looked tired, her usual grace strained by recent events. "I see you found the old records," she said softly. "It's time you both knew the truth." She raised her hand, and her own memory filled the room. They saw a younger version of herself, traveling to Earth in secret. "We've been watching humanity for centuries, waiting for the right signs." The prophecy wasn't just about Lyra being different, it was about finding the right human to awaken the old powers. Young James appeared in the memory, fighting bravely to protect his crew. Your courage, your instinct to protect others, these weren't just admirable qualities, they were signs. The memory changed to show James's first days in the palace. Everywhere he'd walked, the crystal walls had reacted, glowing slightly brighter. Every time he helped Lyra with her powers, tiny sparkles of the same energy had flickered around his own hands, so faint no one had noticed. "You're a descendant of those first human allies," the queen revealed. The crystal armor they wore wasn't just protection, it was a manifestation of their own powers. Powers that have been dormant in their bloodline, waiting for the right moment. As if responding to this revelation, the crystal floor beneath James's feet began to glow. Small crystals started growing around him, forming patterns like the ancient armor they'd seen in the memories. Lyra gasped as one of her memory-like creatures flew to James and didn't fade away. Instead, it settled on his shoulder, becoming solid, a tiny guardian made of light and crystal. But their amazement was interrupted by alarms. The shadow creatures were back, and they'd brought something with them, a darkness that seemed to consume everything it touched. "They're trying to prevent the awakening," the queen said urgently. "If you two fully connect with your powers, the changes to our worlds cannot be stopped." James looked at his hands, now glowing with a faint rainbow light similar to Lyra's. The tiny crystal guardian on his shoulder chirped a warning as darkness began seeping under the library doors. Lyra stood beside him, her own powers flaring. "Mother," she said, her voice stronger than James had ever heard it, "what aren't you telling us? What change is coming that has everyone so afraid?" The queen looked at the darkness approaching, then back at them. "The prophecy speaks of unity between our worlds. But more than that, it speaks of evolution. When human and alien powers combine fully, both our species will change. We will become something new, something never seen before." The darkness broke through, bringing with it the masked attackers and their shadow beasts. But this time, as James and Lyra stood together, both glowing with power, both beginning to understand their true purpose, the shadows seemed less frightening. Above them, through the library's crystal ceiling, the three moons aligned perfectly. Silver flowers began blooming everywhere, even through the darkness, and James felt the ancient power in his blood finally awakening fully. The evolution was beginning. Rising storm. The transformation had already begun. As James and Lyra ran through the palace corridors, their powers left trails of crystalline light that grew into protective barriers behind them. James's newly awakened abilities were still unpredictable. Every time he touched a wall, crystal armor grew over his skin, then faded away moments later. Focus on what you want to create. Lyra called to him, her own powers now strong enough to sustain multiple memory-like creatures. The tiny beings scouted ahead, warning them of danger. They weren't just running from the shadow creatures anymore. The entire palace was changing. Where their combined powers touched, structures shifted, becoming something between crystal and living light. Some areas transformed into chambers that seemed to exist in both past and present simultaneously. Look, James pointed ahead, where one of Lyra's scouts had returned. The tiny light being projected an urgent memory. The queen was in danger. In the throne room, they found chaos. The rebels had captured the queen, holding her in a cage made of dark energy. But something was wrong with her. Her form seemed to flicker, shifting between solid and light. "Mother," Lyra cried out, "what's happening to you?" The queen managed a smile despite her pain. "The change, it's affecting all of us. Our people, humans. Everything is evolving. Some are just changing faster than others." The rebel leader stepped forward, still wearing his broken star badge. But now they could see why he feared change so much. Parts of him were becoming shadow-like, merging with the darkness he commanded. "You see," he snarled, "this evolution you're causing, it's changing us all. Some into light, some into shadow. The balance of reality itself is at stake." As if to prove his point, he gestured to the windows. Outside, the three moons had turned strange colors. One glowing with rainbow light like Lyra's powers, one crystalline like Jane's awakening abilities, and one dark as the shadows themselves. "The moons show the three paths," the queen explained weakly. "Light, crystal, and shadow. Every being must choose their evolution." James felt his crystal armor growing stronger, more permanent. But instead of just covering him, it was becoming part of him. Through gaps in the crystal, rainbow light shone from within. Lyra's memory-like creatures had evolved too. They weren't just showing memories anymore. They were combining them, creating new realities. Where they flew, the air itself seemed to ripple with possibility. The rebel leader laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You still don't understand. The prophecy never meant to unite just two worlds. It meant to create a new one entirely. And in doing so, destroy everything we know." He raised his shadow weapon, but this time it was different. The darkness it released began eating away at reality itself, creating holes in space where nothingness leaked through. "James," Lyra shouted, "remember what we learned about combining powers." They joined hands, and everything changed. James' crystal armor extended to protect them both, while Lyra's memory light beings merged with it, creating a shield of living crystal that could show all possible futures at once. The rebel leader staggered back. "Impossible. You're not just evolving. You're becoming something new," the queen finished, her cage beginning to crack. "Something that can exist in light and shadow, past and future, crystal and memory, all at once." Around them, the palace itself was transforming. Crystal walls became transparent, showing other dimensions, other possibilities. The silver flowers that had been blooming everywhere started to sing, their music somehow helping stabilize the changes. But the shadow creatures weren't done. They began merging together, forming a massive being of pure darkness that towered over them all. Where it touched the transformed palace, reality began to unravel. James looked at Lyra, seeing how her nebula eyes now showed entire galaxies of possibility. His own body felt both solid as crystal and light as energy. "We have to make a choice," Lyra said softly. "Which future do we fight for?" Through their combined powers, they could see them all. a world of pure light, a crystal dimension of perfect order, or endless shadow where chaos reigned. But there was another path, harder to see, where all three existed in balance. The giant shadow creature roared, reaching for the queen with hands made of void. Time was running out. And in that moment, as reality itself hung in the balance, James and Lyra prepared to make a decision that would change not just their worlds, but all possible worlds to come. The true enemy. The Shadow Titan's hand never reached the queen. Instead, it passed through an image of her, a memory projection. The real queen had disappeared, leaving only a trail of crystalline light. Another trick. The rebel leader snarled, his voice held uncertainty. His own body was more shadow than solid now, threads of darkness weaving through him like living ink. James and Lyra stood in their crystal memory shield, watching as reality rippled around them. The palace had become a nexus of all possible worlds. In one corner, everything was pure light and harmony. In another, perfect crystalline order. And in yet another, creative chaos of shadow. But something new was happening. The silver flowers that had been singing began to show images in their petals, memories not of the past, but of possible futures. And in every future, they saw the same thing. A fourth force, hidden behind the struggle between light, crystal, and shadow. Look! Lyra's evolved memory beings had discovered something. They merged together, creating a window through time. Through it, they saw the true history of their worlds. The first queen appeared, but she wasn't making a pact with light beings. She was running from something that existed between realities. The Void Weavers, the queen's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. She stepped out of a crystal wall, her form shifting between solid and light. They feed on change itself, on evolution, on possibility. Above them, cracks appeared in space itself, and through them writhed tentacles of pure nothingness, not shadow, not darkness, but the absence of everything. The prophecy, James realized, his crystal armor resonating with sudden understanding. It was never about choosing between light and shadow. It was about protecting reality itself, Lyra finished. Her nebula eyes could see it now. The Void Weavers had been manipulating everything, pushing for conflict between light and shadow, forcing evolution to happen too fast. The rebel leader staggered back as realization hit him. The broken star badge on his chest wasn't a symbol of resistance, it was a mark of manipulation. The Void Weavers had been using him, using all of them. The Shadow Titan shuddered and collapsed, its darkness flowing away to reveal hundreds of scared people, both aliens and humans, who had been trapped inside it, forced to fuel its power. The three moons, the queen said, have formed, finally stabilizing as something between light and crystal. They're not just showing us paths of evolution, they're showing us how to fight back. James looked at his hands, where crystal armor had merged with rainbow light. Lyra's memory beings danced around them both now, showing not just what was, but what could be. We need all three, Lyra said firmly. Light for creation, crystal for structure, shadow for change. Perfect balance. The rebel leader looked at his shadow-corrupted hands, then at the Void Weavers emerging through reality's cracks. Then let me help fix what I helped break. Together, they began to move. James's crystal power provided the structure, creating bridges between different pieces of reality. Lyra's memory-light beings filled those structures with possibility and life, and the reformed rebels used their shadow powers to keep things flexible, adaptable. The queen raised her hands, and the three moons aligned perfectly. Their light, gold, crystal, and shadow combined into a single beam that struck the palace's central spire. But the Void Weavers were not done. They emerged fully now, massive beings of unreality that threatened to unmake everything they touched. Where they reached, existence simply stopped being. There's only one way, the queen said softly. The prophecy speaks of evolution, yes, but not just of bodies or powers. We must evolve reality itself. James looked at Lyra, understanding passing between them. Their powers had grown beyond just light and crystal. They could see the pattern of existence itself, and more importantly, they could change it. Together, Lyra asked, holding out her hand. Together, James agreed, taking it. Their combined power flared, brighter than ever before. Around them, light, crystal, and shadow began to spin, faster and faster, creating something entirely new, a force that could stand against the void itself. Reality held its breath as they prepared for the final confrontation. The fate of not just their worlds, but all possible worlds, hung in the balance. And the Void Weavers descended, bringing with them the end of everything unless they could forge a new beginning. A new beginning. Reality was unraveling. The Void Weavers' massive forms towered above the palace, their knot bodies rippling with unlight that deleted everything they touched. But in the transformed palace below, something unprecedented was happening. James and Lyra stood at the center of a storm of power. Crystal, light, and shadows swirled around them in perfect harmony. The reformed rebel leader channeled shadow power through his broken star badge, now repaired and glowing with new purpose. The Queen's form shifted between all states, conducting the energies like a cosmic symphony. Now, Lyra commanded, her voice echoing across dimensions. Her memory-like beings had evolved one final time. They were no longer just showing memories, but actively writing new ones into the fabric of reality itself. James's crystal armor had become something more too. Each piece was a window to another possibility, another world. Through them, they could see other versions of themselves fighting the same battle across infinite realities. The Void Weavers attacked, their tentacles of nothingness reaching through every crack in existence. But where they touched the new combined power, something unexpected happened. Instead of deleting reality, they began to transform. They're not destroying it, James realized, watching through his crystal vision. They're trying to reset everything to before creation itself. Lyra's nebula eyes blazed with understanding. Then we don't fight them, we show them something new. She raised her hands, and every silver flower in the palace bloomed at once. Their song changed, becoming a melody of creation itself. Each note carried the story of everything that ever was or could be. The three moons above aligned one final time, but now they did something impossible. They merged into a single celestial body that shone with all powers combined. Its light struck the palace spire, and reality began to rewrite itself. James channeled his crystal power into structure, but not to cage or contain, to create frameworks for new possibilities. The rebel leader's shadows provided space for change within those structures. Lyra's light filled everything with life and memory and potential. The Queen stepped forward, her form now stabilized as something entirely new, a being of crystal that channeled light and cast shadows all at once. "Let me show you," she said to the Void Weavers, "what evolution really means." She opened her hands, and every transformed being in the palace contributed their power. Humans who had gained crystal abilities, aliens who had merged with light, shadow-touched beings who had learned to create instead of destroy. All of them working together. The Void Weavers paused in their assault, experiencing something they had never known before, possibility without end. In that moment, James and Lyra activated their final, most powerful ability, one born from everything they had learned together. Their combined power didn't fight the void or try to destroy it. Instead, it offered the Void Weavers a choice: remain creatures of unreality, forever trying to reset existence, or evolve with them into something greater than the sum of all possibilities. The void tentacles began to crystallize, filling with light and shadow. The Void Weavers' empty forms gained substance, purpose, possibility. They were becoming part of reality instead of its absence. Reality itself was transforming, not into a world of pure light, or perfect crystal, or infinite shadow, but into something that could contain all of these and more. The palace became a nexus, a meeting point of all possibilities, where any form of evolution was possible, but none were forced. The three merged moons separated again, but now they orbited each other in an eternal dance of balance. Their combined light shone down on a changed world. James looked at his hands, still human, but now capable of channeling crystal power when needed. Lyra's memory-like beings had become permanent companions to all, helping guide the way through new possibilities. The rebel leader's shadows now served as guardians of change, ensuring evolution would always have space to occur naturally. "What happens now?" James asked, looking at the transformed landscape where crystal spires housed beings of light and shadow gardens grew with silver flowers. Lyra smiled, her nebula eyes showing peaceful futures. "Now we learn, we grow. We help others understand that evolution isn't about becoming one thing or another, it's about having the freedom to become anything." The Queen stepped forward, looking younger and older all at once. "The prophecy is fulfilled, but not ended. This is just the beginning." Above them, the 3 dancing moons illuminated a world where crystal cities floated in light-filled skies, where shadow gardens grew impossible flowers, where humans and aliens and everything in between lived in harmony. Not because they had to, but because they chose to. And in the center of it all, a single silver flower bloomed, its petals showing infinite possibilities yet to come. The end.